My aunt stole my grandmother's heirloom jewelry and gave it to her daughter as a wedding gift. When I found out, I exposed her to the whole family and took back what was rightfully mine. But one thing. Here's something that will really get you fired up. Imagine a family heirloom, something priceless, something that's been passed down for generations, meant to stay in the family as a symbol of love and legacy. Now, picture that very treasure being stolen right from under your nose by someone who is supposed to cherish and respect it just as much as you do. That's exactly what happened to me, and let me tell you, I was not about to let it slide. My grandmother had this beautiful set of heirloom jewelry, intricate gold pieces with delicate gemstones, each one holding decades of history. She had always been clear about who it was meant for. Ever since I was little, she'd tell me, one day this will be yours. It was more than just jewelry. It was a connection to her, to our past, to our family's story. So when she passed away, I fully expected it to come to me as she had always promised. But then something didn't add up. For months I kept asking about the jewelry, assuming it had just been misplaced during all the chaos of losing her. My relatives kept dodging the question, acting strangely whenever I brought it up. I started feeling like I was losing my mind, like maybe I had misunderstood all those years. But deep down I knew something wasn't right. And then one day I found out the ugly truth. My aunt had taken the heirloom set and without a second thought, gifted it to her daughter as a special wedding present. That's right. She didn't ask, she didn't tell anyone, she just took it. And the worst part? She acted like she had every right to do it. She smiled at the wedding, proudly watching her daughter wear the jewelry, completely confident that no one would ever challenge her. That's when I realized if I didn't do something, she was going to get away with it. I knew exposing her would cause a massive family fallout, but at that point I didn't care. This wasn't just about the jewelry. It was about respect, about keeping my grandmother's wishes alive. So I made a choice. I confronted her, right then and there in front of the entire family, and let's just say she never saw it coming. What happened next? Well, let's just say things got very messy very fast. The moment I called my aunt out in front of everyone, the entire room went dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop. People looked around awkwardly, unsure of how to react. My aunt's face drained of color, but she quickly tried to play it off with a nervous laugh. I don't know what you're talking about, she said, waving a hand dismissively. This was my gift to my daughter. Why would you make such an accusation during such a special occasion? I expected her to deny it, but hearing her say it so casually made my blood boil. Did she really think I was going to back down just because we were surrounded by family? If anything, that made me even more determined. I wasn't about to let her twist the truth. Oh really? I shot back, crossing my arms. So you're saying Grandma never intended to pass that jewelry down to me? Because I remember her telling me, multiple times, that it was meant for me. And if you really want to play dumb, I can start pulling up old pictures of her wearing it. My cousin, the bride, shifted uncomfortably. She had been listening quietly, her hands gripping the fabric of her wedding dress. I wasn't sure if she had known the truth or if my aunt had fed her some lie, but she wasn't saying anything to defend herself. Maybe a part of her had suspected something was off. Other family members started murmuring amongst themselves. Some of my older relatives, who knew about my grandmother's wishes, were giving my aunt disapproving looks. My uncle, the bride's father, looked furious, but he hadn't said a word yet. My aunt, however, wasn't going to back down without a fight. Oh please, she scoffed. Grandma loved all of us. She wanted it to stay in the family, and that's exactly what I did. It belongs to my daughter now, and I think we should all move on instead of ruining a happy day over some old jewelry. Some old jewelry? I repeated, my voice thick with disbelief. That old jewelry was Grandma's most treasured possession. It wasn't just some accessory to be handed off without a second thought. It was meant to go to me, and you stole it. I could see her mask cracking. She was starting to realize that no one was jumping to her defense. That's when my uncle finally spoke up, his voice sharp and unwavering. Is this true? He asked, staring straight at his wife. Did you take it without telling anyone? For the first time she hesitated. The truth was out now, and there was no easy way for her to wriggle out of it. But she wasn't done trying. That jewelry is ours, she insisted. I was just doing what was best for the family, but before she could finish, my cousin, the bride, finally spoke. Her voice was quiet but firm. Mom, is it true? The look on my aunt's face told me everything I needed to know. She had been caught and there was no way out. But what she did next? That was something none of us saw coming. My aunt's eyes darted between the confused faces of the family, her grip tightening around her purse like it might somehow give her the strength to escape the mess she'd made. But there was no getting away now. The words hung in the air, and the room was charged with a kind of tension that only a family betrayal can bring. At first it seemed like my aunt might still try to spin her story. She opened her mouth, perhaps to justify herself or try to convince everyone that she was in the right, but the words never came. Instead, her eyes shifted toward my cousin, her daughter, who stood there with a look of growing horror on her face. It wasn't the kind of wedding day shock anyone wants, but that's what she was facing. Her smile, which had been so bright just moments before, now seemed forced, like she was struggling to keep up with the reality of what was unfolding. "Mom," my cousin's voice trembled, "why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you tell me it wasn't yours to give?" The silence that followed felt heavier than anything I could have imagined. It was like the weight of generations of family history was suddenly on her shoulders too. She turned to face me, her eyes wide with uncertainty. "I didn't know. I had no idea it was—" "No, of course you didn't," I said, my voice sharp. "You had no reason to question her. She made sure you never did." I didn't want to go after my cousin. She was just caught in the middle. But I couldn't help the frustration bubbling inside me. But that doesn't change the fact that my grandmother trusted me with that jewelry, not her. My aunt's eyes narrowed. She didn't appreciate being publicly called out, especially not by me. The room had shifted from awkward silence to full-blown tension, and I could see the anger rising in her. Her cheeks flushed and her jaw clenched tightly. She was preparing for battle, and it was clear I wasn't the only one who was going to feel the heat of this confrontation. "You really want to air all our dirty laundry in front of everyone?" she spat. "This isn't the place and this isn't the time. You think you're the only one who has a connection to Grandma? You think just because you were promised something—" Her voice cracked, but she quickly regained her composure. "Well, you're wrong. Things change, people change. Grandma's gone and it's time to move on. Why should I let you control everything?" Her words were a knife to the gut. The audacity. The way she made it sound like the legacy I was holding on to was just some irrelevant piece of the past that didn't matter anymore. But what hurt the most was the betrayal. This wasn't just about jewelry. It was about family, trust, and respect. Things that my aunt had slowly chipped away at over the years. When I thought back to all those times she acted so sweet and caring, I wondered how many of those moments had been lies. How many times had she been plotting behind my back? How long had she been planning to steal something that wasn't hers to begin with? As I stood there, my mind racing, I noticed a shift in the room. My uncle, who had been silent until now, was starting to look uncomfortable. He shifted on his feet, avoiding my gaze. Something was off. Was he in on this too? Or was he just too scared to stand up to my aunt? I couldn't tell, but I could see his unease, and that only added more fuel to the fire. The longer the silence stretched, the more I felt the weight of the situation pressing down on me. I was ready for a fight, but I wasn't sure if everyone else was. Would the rest of my family back me up? Or would they all just sweep this under the rug to avoid making waves? My heart pounded as I tried to figure out my next move. I knew I had to take control of this before it spiraled out of hand. But deep down, I knew this wasn't just about the jewelry anymore. It was about setting boundaries, holding people accountable, and ensuring that no one ever took what was mine again. But with each passing moment, I could feel the family fracture more and more. The tension was unbearable, and my aunt's glare was growing colder by the second. She wasn't done yet, and neither was I. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, the weight of the moment sinking deeper with each passing second. The room was frozen, all eyes glued to the mess unfolding before them. My aunt stood rigid, her arms crossed, her gaze burning through me, and I knew she wasn't going to back down without a fight. I couldn't help but wonder how far she was willing to go to protect her lie. I turned to my cousin, who still seemed lost, caught in the middle of everything. She looked like she was about to crumble under the pressure. The last thing I wanted to do was make her feel guilty for something she had no control over. But this was bigger than just one person's wedding. It was about what was right, about standing up for what belonged to me, and my grandmother's legacy. "I'm not doing this to hurt you," I told her, my voice softer but still firm. "I just want the truth to come out. This isn't about you, it's about what was stolen from me." My cousin didn't respond at first, her eyes darting between me and my mom. I could see the conflict in her expression, the struggle between loyalty to her mother, and the sinking feeling that something wasn't right. "Look," my aunt snapped, stepping in front of my cousin as if shielding her from the truth. "We don't need to do this right now. We can settle it later." "No," I cut her off, my voice rising. "No more hiding behind excuses. You stole it, and now you're acting like you did nothing wrong." The tension in the room was so thick I felt like I couldn't breathe. Every word I spoke felt like a battle, and with each one, I knew my aunt was getting more desperate. My uncle shifted uncomfortably in the corner, clearly torn. I could tell he was trying to figure out how to play this, whether he would back his wife or take a stand for what was right. His silence was almost as loud as my aunt's angry words. It wasn't lost on me that he hadn't said a word in my defense. If he was going to speak up, it had to be now. "Stop acting like you've done nothing wrong." I snapped at him, my frustration boiling over. "You've been complicit in this. How could you not have known what she did?" My uncle flinched, but he stayed silent. The unease in his eyes made it clear that he had no intention of stepping in. That was it. This was a battle I was going to have to fight alone. Just when it seemed like the room might erupt into chaos, my aunt took a step forward, her expression shifting. For the first time, she looked almost vulnerable. It was fleeting, a momentary crack in her armor. She took a deep breath, and for a second I thought maybe, just maybe, she would come clean. But then she raised her chin, squared her shoulders, and her voice dropped to a dangerously calm tone. "You're going to regret this," she said softly, but I could hear the threat in her words. You think you're the only one who can claim something from the past? You don't know the whole story. You've never been part of our world. You're nothing but a child with an idea of what's right and wrong. I have my own reasons for everything I've done, and you won't understand them. That was when I felt it. The shift. The realization that this wasn't just about jewelry anymore. It was about power, control, and something much deeper. There was more to this than I could see, and my aunt was trying to keep it buried. But how far was she willing to go to keep her secrets hidden? I stepped forward, ignoring the shaky feeling in my stomach. You can't intimidate me. I'm taking what's mine, what's rightfully mine. And no matter what you say or do, I'm not backing down. The room held its breath, everyone waiting for what would happen next. My aunt didn't reply. She didn't need to. The air was thick with tension, and I could tell this was far from over. Something was about to break. The question was, who would come out on top? Just as I thought the room couldn't get any more charged, something unexpected happened. I was about to step forward, prepared to make my final demand, when the door swung open with a sharp creak, interrupting the growing standoff. My heart skipped a beat as I turned toward the sound. Standing in the doorway with a stunned expression on her face was my other aunt, the one I hadn't seen in years. She wasn't a regular at family events, and seeing her now of all times felt wrong. She wasn't part of this fight, and yet here she was, her presence unsettling and out of place. She took a few slow steps into the room, her eyes scanning over the tense faces, before they finally landed on mine. "What's going on here?" she asked, her voice low but sharp. There was no mistaking the intensity in her gaze. She was used to reading a room, and she could tell immediately something wasn't right. Everyone fell silent, looking from my aunt to me, unsure how to react to this sudden shift. My aunt, the one who had stolen the jewelry, straightened up, clearly rattled. "It's nothing," she said, her voice forced. "Just a misunderstanding." But the other aunt wasn't having it. Her eyes narrowed, and she took a step forward, crossing her arms. "Don't lie to me. What's really going on? I know when something's off with this family, and trust me, I can feel it in the air." The tension in the room had already been unbearable, but now with my aunt's arrival, it felt like a pressure cooker on the verge of exploding. Everyone was on edge. I looked around at my relatives, searching for answers, but they were all waiting for someone else to speak. It was like the moment my other aunt walked in, all eyes turned to her. For a brief moment, I thought she might side with my aunt, the one who had taken the jewelry. After all, they were both from the same generation, both part of the family's more secretive side. But then she glanced back at me, her eyes softening. Something in her expression made my stomach tighten. It was like she knew more than she was letting on. "I don't think this is a misunderstanding at all," my aunt said quietly. "In fact, I think I know exactly what's going on. And I think it's time someone finally tells the truth." The room went completely still. For a split second, I thought I might have misheard her. What was she talking about? What truth? Was she really about to reveal something that could completely change everything? Before I could even process the words, she turned to my aunt, the one who had stolen the jewelry, and said, "I know about the will. I know about your plan to take everything for yourself, including the jewelry. And I know exactly why you gave it to your daughter. But you're not the only one with a secret." The air grew thick with disbelief. I could feel my legs shaking beneath me. It was like a bomb had just dropped in the middle of everything. The family heirloom, the jewelry, was the least of our problems now. Whatever my aunt had done, whatever my other aunt was about to reveal, was much bigger than I could have imagined. My aunt, the one who had been caught stealing the jewelry, stood frozen, her face draining of all color. For the first time, she looked truly terrified. Her confident, smug demeanor crumbled into something unrecognizable. But instead of defending herself, she just stared at the aunt who had spoken, her lips trembling, like she was waiting for the inevitable fallout. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," she whispered, barely audible, her voice cracking under the weight of the accusation. "I was trying to protect you all from the truth." "Protect us?" my other aunt repeated, her voice rising now. "Or protect yourself? You've been playing a dangerous game, and now you've dragged everyone into it." I stood there, my head spinning. I had thought I was fighting for a family heirloom, but now it felt like I was caught in the middle of something much bigger, something I hadn't been prepared for. The heirloom was just the beginning, and the truth, whatever it was, had the power to shatter everything I thought I knew about my family. And just like that, the stakes were raised higher than I ever could have anticipated. This wasn't just about stealing jewelry anymore. This was about secrets, lies, and a web of deception that stretched far beyond my grandmother's passing. What was I really fighting for? Was I ready to face the truth, no matter how ugly it was? And most importantly, who could I trust now? The room was electric with tension as my aunt, who had been caught red-handed, finally crumbled. Her eyes were wide with panic, and I could see the guilt in the way her hands shook as she reached for a glass of water, as if the simple act could steady her. But nothing could. Nothing could take back the damage she had done, the lie she had built her entire story on. "I was trying to protect the family," she said, her voice a whisper now, almost pleading. "I thought if I gave it to her. If I just..." She stopped mid-sentence, looking up at my other aunt as if waiting for some kind of salvation. But the damage was done. My other aunt stepped forward, the quiet strength in her posture now undeniable. "You didn't protect anyone, you just wanted to keep everything for yourself," she said, her voice steady. Yet there was a coldness to it that cut through the room. "The will, the jewelry. It was all a part of your plan to take control after Grandma passed. You wanted to keep us all in the dark, to make sure you were the one who walked away with the most. And you almost succeeded." I was still processing everything, my mind trying to connect the dots. What was this will they were talking about? I'd never even seen a will. Grandma's wishes had always been clear to me, but what about the rest of the family? Was I the only one who had never been told? I turned to my aunt, the one who had just exposed the truth, and my voice broke as I asked, "What do you mean? What will?" But before she could answer, something happened that stopped all of us cold. Because there was no will, came a voice from the doorway. We all turned to see my mother standing there, her face pale, eyes red as if she'd been crying. I hadn't even realized she had entered the room, but now it was clear. She was carrying something small, tucked inside a folder. She walked toward us slowly, deliberately. I had never seen her look so serious. She handed the folder to my other aunt, who opened it with trembling hands. There, in the folder, was a single faded piece of paper. A will. My grandmother's handwriting was unmistakable, and it was clear as day. The jewelry, the heirlooms, everything that had been passed down was to go to me. But there was more. A clause that no one had ever known about, a clause that was set to change everything. "The jewelry wasn't the only thing Grandma wanted you to have," my mom said, her voice thick with emotion. "She left everything to you. The house, the savings, the business. Everything." The room went completely silent. I felt my heart race, the blood rushing to my ears. My aunt, my other aunt, the one who had stolen the jewelry, was staring at the paper in disbelief. This can't be right," she muttered, her voice shaky, as if the ground beneath her had just shattered. But it wasn't the jewelry that was shaking her now. It was everything. "You think you had a right to take control after Grandma was gone?" My mom continued, her voice firm. "You think it was just about the jewelry? You underestimated how much she loved her family, how much she wanted to make sure the right person was taking care of what she left behind. It was never meant for you to control, to give away as gifts. That was your own greed talking, not Grandma." I could see the color drain from my aunt's face. The weight of her actions, the lies she had built to justify what she had done, all collapsed in an instant. She hadn't just stolen jewelry. She had tried to steal my future. But just when I thought the storm had passed, a final unexpected twist came. "I didn't steal it," my aunt said, her voice shaking now. I didn't know about the will. I thought everything was left to your mother." She pointed to my mom, but there was something in her eyes, something I couldn't quite place. I thought it was meant for her." My mom's face tightened, the truth sinking in like a knife. She had known something was off when Grandma passed, but she hadn't fully understood it until now. She slowly turned to face me, her eyes soft with regret. "I didn't know the will was there," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Your grandmother. She was always the one keeping the family together. She didn't want to cause any more drama, so she kept things quiet. And now it's all coming out too late." And that was the final twist. The truth had been hiding in plain sight, buried under layers of secrets and assumptions. My aunt hadn't stolen the jewelry with malicious intent, but out of a mix of fear and confusion. And in the end, it wasn't just about the jewelry or the will. It was about all of us coming to terms with the past and the mistakes we had all made. I walked over to my aunt, standing tall as I took the heirloom jewelry back, feeling the weight of everything that had happened. But this wasn't just about the jewelry anymore. It was about us finding a way to move forward together, no matter how broken we had become. The final truth had been revealed, but it wasn't just the heirlooms that were passed down. It was the lesson that family, trust, and honesty couldn't be bought or stolen. And now we would have to rebuild from the ashes of the secrets we had buried for too long. The room was silent, and for a long moment, it felt like time itself had stopped. There were no more arguments, no more accusations. The truth had finally come out, and it was like a weight lifted from all of us. My aunt, who had been so sure of herself just moments ago, now stood there, her shoulders slumped, the bravado gone. She was no longer the villain in the story, just a woman who had made a mistake that had nearly torn the family apart. I looked around at my relatives, at the faces that had once been so full of suspicion and fear. The tension had eased, but there was still a lingering sense of sadness, a quiet realization that our family had been holding on to secrets for far too long. The past couldn't be erased, but it could be acknowledged, and that was the first step toward healing. My mom stood beside me, her hand resting gently on my shoulder. "We'll be okay," she said softly. "It'll take time, but we'll figure this out. You don't need to carry this weight on your own anymore." For the first time in a long while, I believed her. I had spent so much time holding on to anger, trying to make sense of the past, that I hadn't realized how much power I had to shape my own future. The jewelry, the house, the legacy, it was all part of the story, but it was no longer the story. What mattered now was rebuilding the trust that had been lost, and learning to move forward as a family. As the evening wore on, we slowly started to talk again, cautiously at first. My aunt, the one who had taken the jewelry, apologized to me, and to everyone in the room for her actions. It wasn't easy for her, and I could see the genuine remorse in her eyes. But it was a start. The following weeks weren't without their challenges, but slowly, things began to change. We started to rebuild the relationships that had been fractured by years of secrecy. We shared memories of my grandmother, laughed at the old stories, and for the first time we allowed ourselves to be vulnerable with each other. In the end, it wasn't about the heirlooms or the wealth. It was about family, and how the true value of what we had inherited wasn't in the things we could touch, but in the bonds we could rebuild. The legacy my grandmother left behind wasn't just a set of jewels or material things. It was the lesson that family is worth fighting for, and that honesty, no matter how painful, is the only way forward.